All right, Chapter 11. This is going to be ensuring business continuity. So far, we have pretty much dealt with detecting and preventing security risks from affecting our systems or networks. But there are cases where the risk that occurs causes a disruption that threatens the organization's very existence, right? And so, for an organization to maintain its viability, we need to ensure that the business process is not disrupted when one of these in a bad situation, right? So in this case, we're going to we're going to learn about the business continuity process, and we're going to select processes related to business continuity and um, disaster recovery, and we're going to develop a business continuity plan. So, business continuity and disaster recovery. Business continuity, um, in maintaining business operations in the face of a disaster, this is going to be a challenge, right? So there's not really a single approach that will mitigate all the effects of a potential disaster. So we have to be able to identify the business continuity processes that may be potentially available to us and select the ones that are most appropriate for our given organization. So, the business continuity itself can be defined as a collection of processes enabling an organization to maintain normal business operations after an adverse event. It is also known as COOP, which is continuity of operations. So you're either going to see something like you might see something like BCP, which is a business continuity plan, or COOP, right? So COOP and BCP, right? So there are numerous different types of events, both natural and man-made, that could disrupt the business, and they're going to require a continuity effort to be put in place, right? And these events these are the events that would really constitute a disaster, not just a minor incident, right? um, they may be started by a malicious party. It could come about by negligence. It could be a natural disaster. These are things that are going to threaten our very existence, man. It could be something like uh, given right now we're having this coronavirus outbreak, maybe we're a company where this is seriously going to affect our business. So this is us trying to survive as a business, right? Um, so this is more of an extended event rather than just simple incident responses and things like that, right? Um, so we have a disaster recovery. So this is going to be a major component of the business continuity, and it's going to focus on recovering assets after a disaster, right? So it's going to ensure that our IT environment is brought back to a working baseline. Um, it's also going to be one of the most important steps in ensuring business continuity. So, when it comes to the disaster recovery process, um, we're going to first want to notify our stakeholders, right? Our stakeholders should be informed of a business critical disaster. So, our stakeholders are going to be people like our senior management, our board members, our investors, our clients, suppliers, employees, possibly the public, right? And so there are different categories of stakeholders, and they're going to be notified at different times. And the level of detail that we are going to give them depends on what kind of stakeholder they are, right? Um, we might not divulge all of our information to the public at large, but we will divulge it to the CEO or somebody, right? Um, Next up, we're going to want to begin emergency operations. So there should be detailed steps regarding specific emergency services. An incident manager should be able to should be appointed to assume control of a situation to ensure personnel safety, right? And then we need to assess the damage. So a damage assessment should be conducted to determine the extent of our damage, right? Or it needs to be done to determine the appropriate response strategies. They need to, for instance, full recovery to a remote site might not be warranted if the damage is limited to parts of the business that don't threaten our operational functions. And we need to be able to estimate our downtime and determine how far we need to go with it because of that. Assess the facility. So it is necessary to assess the current facility's ability to continue being the primary location of operations, right? So if this facility has been adversely affected, then we're going to need to relocate operations to an alternate site. That possibly could be our best option. And then finally, we're going to begin the recovery process. So once we have notified the stakeholders, performed the initial emergency operations, assessed our damage, and everything's in motion, then our recovery process can really start. So we have a recovery team. The recovery team is going to be a group of designated individuals who are going to implement our recovery processes. So the recovery team is going to immediately respond in the event of emergency, and is going to restore our critical business process to normal operating capacity. This can include system managers. They'll include system admins, security admins, facility specialists, communications, HR, definitely legal, right? So all those people will possibly be a part of our recovery team. So we have an order of restoration, and this order of restoration is going to dictate what type of systems we're going to prioritize in our recovery efforts. So not all systems are created equal. Um, the same way we label data based on its sensitivity and its functions, we need to classify our hardware and the services and networks based upon how crucial each one of these components are to our overall business continuity. It's going to be the same way like how, when you go to the emergency room, you're going to be put in triage, right? Somebody who's been shot is going to get attention before the person that has a cold, right? So we need to triage the damage that's done to our organization. Giving examples for something in IT, imagine a storage company whose data center was flooded, right? And so one day, one of our primary data centers, it gets flooded, right? And most of the physical servers and network cables, the appliances are damaged beyond repair. And then, in addition, there was water damage in our general office areas, and it caused damage to our desks, our employee property, workstations. So, as a part of the business process and disaster recovery program, we're going to have an order of operations for this, an order of restorations. So maybe this place was already, maybe this data center was located in a flood prone area, right? So the order of operations that our company has already decided on would be restoring and cleaning and drying the conditions in our data center. Next up, we will want to restore power to our data center. After that, we will want to restore the internal data center networking. Then we're going to want to restore the data center storage and the processing servers, and then restore inbound and outbound network connection to the data center. Why? Because our data center is the most important thing here, right? Because this is a cloud storage company. So the data center is of the utmost priority, right? And so after the data center is up and running, then we'll want to go and restore our workstation functionalities. And then we can go fix our desk and our cubicle up and, put pictures back up on the wall and stuff, right? Recovery sites. So, in order to help ensure business continuity, an organization can have different types of recovery sites, right? And these are alternate sites to restore system functions. So, a hot site is a fully configured alternate network that can be online quickly after a disaster, right? So an example would be an operations center that can be fully staffed within hours of a disaster, right? So it's pretty much a mirror site somewhere else that we can just go over there and get things started, no problem, right? And then we have a warm site. So a warm site is a location that is dormant or performs non-critical functions that can be rapidly converted into a key operations site. So maybe you have a customer service center that we can convert into um, a network maintenance facility, right? And then we have a cold site, and that is going to be predetermined alternate location where a network can actually be rebuilt. So this is just going to be like an empty site that has the capability of power and network hookups. So an example of a hot site would be like um, ha- uh, like if Amazon right now, Amazon is creating a second headquarters in Northern Virginia right now, and they already have their Seattle location, right? So what they would do is move if the primary operations in Seattle was to fail, they would just move all operations completely to the East Coast site, right? And then Apple has its main site in Cupertino, California, right? This will be an example of a warm site. So instead, if something happened in California, maybe there was a earthquake or something like that, they're creating a smaller. It's not a fully fledged operational site like Amazon's East Coast headquarters, but it's a smaller site which is going to be um, able that performs non-critical functions, right? So that's going to be in Austin, right? It is going. It's not so much dormant as what the slides talk about, but it is going to be able to quickly be converted into something else. So just as the slide says, customer service centers quickly convert into network maintenance. In this case, this Austin location should be able to take over for stuff that Cupertino currently does. And then a cold site, right? I mean, you've likely seen where on some sort of educational channel or something like that, in the event of a disaster at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, they have sites underground where our government can continue to function. That's not currently used, but they have everything there to get up and running. Secure recovery. So business continuity and disaster recovery must include processes for securely recovering data, systems, other sensitive resources, right? So this might mean designating a trusted administrator to supervise the recovery. It also could mean documenting the steps and information used to restore the systems, the processes, the data needed to recover from this disaster. Um, there might also be instructions for continuing the operations either at a primary site or the alternative recovery site. So the main thing here though is that all these recovery processes, they need to be tested regularly, right? And to ensure they work in the first place. Because at some point you're going to have a disaster and then you can't even recover properly because you never tested it out to make sure that everybody knew the correct steps they were supposed to take, the correct actions. Backup types. So the process for recovering data from backups is going to depend on what type of backup that we have, right? So there are three main types of backups. So we have a full backup here. So in this case, all selected files, regardless of their prior state, are going to be backed up. So these full backups, they're going to consume a whole lot of space. And the recovery process is going to, I mean, it's slow to actually back up, but the recovery process is quicker, right? Because they're fast and reliable, because we have all the data, right? The problem here is, well, the main idea here is to know, okay, on Monday, full backup. Everything on my computer, everything on there is backed up. So if I have a 500 gigabyte hard drive, all 500 gigabytes are backed up on Monday. Tuesday, all 500 gigabytes are backed up again. Wednesday, same thing. Thursday, same thing. So that after a while, that is going to be what? Just on those 4 days, I now have 2 terabytes worth of data that's been backed up, right? And this doesn't necessarily mean that any of this data has changed at all. I might not even been on the computer this entire time. However, I have 2 terabytes of data now. After that, we have two others. We have a differential backup and an incremental. So a differential backup is going to be all files that have changed since the last full backup, right? So when differential backups are used, we have to restore the last full backup plus the most recent differential backup. So differential backups are going to take less storage space. They're going to take less time. However, they're said to take a longer time to recover. So in this case, I have my full backup on Monday. So that's my entire 500 gigabytes, right? And then I have Tuesday. So maybe Tuesday I created another, I don't know, gigabyte or two of data, right? So then I have 502 gigabytes in total. Then Wednesday, I have the difference between Wednesday and Monday, right? So Wednesday, I might have created another 2 gigabytes of data, right? So now um, I have another 2 gigabytes of data, right? However, I deleted a gigabyte that was created Tuesday, right? So now I have 3 extra gigabytes totally, right? So now I have 503, right? Um, and then same on for Thursday. So basically, what is happening here is I can only go to Monday and Thursday, right? I can't go to Wednesday. Anything that has been changed completely from Wednesday and Thursday is no longer there. I only have Thursday and Monday, right? However, in an incremental backup, when incremental backups are used, we're restoring the last full backup plus any subsequent incremental backup. So this is going to take less time to perform than a differential backup. It's going to include less data, and potentially less data, and then it's probably slower to recover from, right? However, in this case, I can back up to, I can restore myself to any previous day, right? So I have all the changes from Thursday, all the changes from Wednesday, all the changes from Tuesday, right? So if Thursday comes and I need to revert back to Tuesday, I can do that, right? However, with a differential backup, I can't revert back to Tuesday. I can only revert back to Monday. So securing backups. Backing up sensitive data or important data is a piece of the solution. However, the backup has to be secure. A backup can be considered secure if it's offline and off-site and stored in an environment where it's a locked location protected against environmental damage, right? And then secure backups need to be accurately labeled as secure to make sure that nobody accidentally overwrites this data. There are implications when having multiple backups. So we should consider that the fact that while it may seem rare, there are occasions where a backup is corrupted or lost at the same time as your primary data set. Think of it like this: if you had, if you have additional copies of something in your house, and your house catches on fire, those backups are gone, right? So we're going to want to consider having our backups in multiple locations, right? You may have multiple backups on Google, like one on Google, one on Apple's iCloud, and one on Amazon, right? And so if anything happens to one of those websites um, or servers, your backup is safe, hopefully, on another one of those servers, on Amazon's or whatever. So you're going to need to strike a balance between your appetite for risk as far as it comes to losing your primary data and your appetite for risk when it comes to having your backup compromised, possibly, right? So you need to strike a balance between having too many backups and not enough backups, because thing is also with that's going to cost money to have a lot of backups, and it's going to hurt you if you don't have enough, right? And then also we need to be aware that having a whole bunch of backups could lead to compromise, right? Because there's more places for somebody to maybe get into your data. We also need to check up on our integrity of our backups. So even though our backup may not fail at the same time as our primary data, it may have failed earlier, right? So we want to make sure that our backup is still up to date. So we're going to want to have process in place to identify file corruption and making sure that there's no actual problems here, any other issues involved. Geographic considerations. So our backup media needs to be secure, but it has to be accessible, right? In case we need it. So many organizations are going to use offsite, on-sites and off-site backup storage. So an on-site location is normally going to contain our most recent set of backups so they can be accessed as quickly as possible during normal operations. However, the off-site location would be a secure, disaster-resistant location where we keep our duplicate or our older backups, right? Things we Our long-term backups, and we're gonna that way we protect them against any damage at our primary site. Um, there are implications when it comes to having off-site data, right? So for one, um, having our data a short distance away makes it easier to grab it and restore operations. However, it's possible that anything that happens to our primary location happens to the backup location, right? So, like an entire um, geographic region could be susceptible to a hurricane. Like if we're in Florida, having some of our stuff in Dade County and some of our stuff in Broward County is not really going to help us in that case. So all site backups need to be geographically dispersed in order to hopefully cut down on that type of thing, right? So maybe you have something in Florida and then something in the West Coast, right? Or in the Southwest. There are challenges involved in putting things in different municipalities. So we have different states, counties, and regions. They all have their own different laws. There's a new law right now in California where you indicate at the bottom of web pages now that you don't want your data to be sold to a third party, right? And so other states, they don't have that law, right? So I'm located in Maryland. Maryland does not have that law, so they can sell my data as much as they want to. However, companies don't really like to deal with all that all the time. So on this website or multiple websites that are currently enforcing that law, you can scroll down to the bottom and it'll say don't sell my data, and then hopefully you'll be able to have your data deleted or removed from other people. The thing is with that, maybe they want to check up and make sure that you're actually a California resident. Um, Also, different companies, um, different nations have a different socio-political outlook concerning information technology. So we may need to adjust our data retention policies because a nation may not respect data privacy. So maybe they don't think you should have any privacy, right? If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be worried about anything in their minds. They may disapprove of certain content. So in certain locations, certain adult content is banned from those countries. Um, Nation states could also be suspicious of security measures such as encryption. So as I said before, in China, they are requiring all businesses to give up their encryption keys by a certain date in the near future, a couple years from now, I believe, in order to continue doing business in China. In some countries, encryption is outlawed altogether. Um, so you have to research foreign laws and cultures and to make sure that you are in compliance with the law. So there are guidelines when selecting business continuity and disaster recovery processes. We need to be aware that there are different ways our business could be threatened, right? It could be some sort of hack. It could be an earthquake, right? So it could be coronavirus in this case. That's pretty much hitting the cruise industry pretty hard right now. Um, Implement an overall business continuity process. So what are we going to do, right? If our business is being threatened in a manner that threatens its entire existence. We need to implement disaster recovery to restore our IT operations. We need to follow these disaster recovery processes because then we, we we didn't follow our plan, right? Um, then form a recovery team, determine an order of restoration, and consider maintaining alternate recovery sites. We need to choose between a warm, hot, and cold recovery site that we may have all three of them if we can afford it, or maybe we don't. We need to balance that with our business needs. We need to ensure that the recovery processes are secure from compromise because we can't fully recover if they are compromised. We need to choose an appropriate backup type, whatever fits our needs, right? Once again, ensure that our backups are secured in a good location. Consider the implications of having multiple backup sites. Um, Regularly test the integrity of these backups because, hey, they're not doing you any good if they're not actually backing up. Consider placing backups off site so that way when you're flooded, if you're in New Orleans or something like that, maybe your backups don't get flooded too. Maybe you have them, in Texas somewhere. Be aware of the pros and cons of close versus distant backups. A close backup may be affected by the same thing as your primary data. However, having a distant backup may uh, be susceptible to another issue, right? Maybe that wherever your backups are, maybe they are prone to earthquakes, or maybe where your other backups are, maybe they're prone to government interference in which maybe your backups become nationalized, right? So you're going to need to research the culture and laws of the region that's going to be hosting your backups. And remember, a failure to plan is, in this case, a plan to actually fail, right? So, our first activity of the chapter is going to be selecting a business continuity and disaster recovery process. So, Developtech has needs to improve its business continuity and its disaster recovery efforts. You have been assigned to evaluate the existing processes and select new ones. This is going to help Developtech restore normal business operations after a disaster. So now that we've selected our appropriate business continuity and disaster recovery processes, we can begin to incorporate them into a plan of action. And so these plans are going to guide our recovery efforts and ensure that they are effective as possible. Um, so a business continuity plan is going to be a policy that describes and ratifies the organization's overall business continuity strategy, right? So a viable BCP should involve the identification of critical systems and their components in order to ensure that the assets are protected. The BCP is going to ensure the survival of the organization itself by preserving key documents, establishing a decision making authority, facilitating communication among our shareholders, maintaining our financial functions, and more. Um, our BCP should address infrastructure issues. These infrastructure issues could be high availability and fault tolerance, or the creation and maintenance of backups, and making sure that they can withstand failure, right? Um, the BCP should be tested and reviewed regularly in order to ensure that it actually works. And it has to be signed by an executive in order to be authoritative. So in this case, we have a quick snapshot of a business continuity plan, quick reference. Now these plans are very long documents. I had to do several of them in college. So I believe this one was like 50 pages in creating a business continuity plan. So for this quick snapshot of it, this quick reference, we first have our decision making authority. So that is going to be made up of our decision making team, our business continuity team. So we're going to have the chair of the BCT, and that in this case is going to be the chief operations officer. And then it has the backup, right? So if the COO isn't available, then the CIO is going to be the acting chair. And then we're going to have all of our other members, security officers, vice presidents, maybe the manager of a plant. I guess in this case, maybe we're talking about some sort of, let's say it's a power plant or something. Then we're going to have an emergency response plan. So this is going to be a high level synopsis of our emergency response plan. So if the condition arises, then the most senior staff member is going to first notify the chair of the BCT, and if that person's not available, then they're going to notify this person, and then see details inside of our exact plan. Or see details inside for the exact plan, right? And then we have our operations center locations. It tells us, okay, where we're going to go in case of that our primary site is damaged, etc. So where we're going to meet at our alternate site, who's going to be in charge there, etc. Communications, so only the BCT may discuss the emergency situation with outside public authorities or with the media, right? And then our BCT team members are responsible for informing their business divisions of our emergency condition and the invocation of the plan. So whoever is designated the manager or whoever is overseeing some of our lower level employees, they need to invoke that plan for them, right? And we're going to have a divisional hierarchy here. Then we have our service and system recovery, and so that's going to state our overall goal, right? So we want to resume tier 1 functions within a couple hours, tier 2 within a few days. We might even have a tier 3, right? And then we're going to have review and testing. So it states that this plan is going to be reviewed quarterly, and a structured walkthrough will be performed annually. So that is a quick level overview of that. When it comes to disaster recovery plans, the DRP is going to be a policy that describes and ratifies the organization's disaster recovery policy. So the disaster recovery plan is going to include the disaster recovery plan is a policy that describes and ratifies the organization's disaster recovery strategy. A DRP, which is a disaster recovery plan, is going to help the organization recover from an incident with a minimal loss of time and money. And they're typically going to be focused on restoring IT operations to a working capacity. And also, they're going to be focused on ensuring the safety of our personnel. So a DRP can include things like a list of contact information for our individuals responsible for a recovery. They're going to have an inventory of our hardware and software. It's going to have a record of important business processes and consumer information in order for us to continue business. So you might have like our, if we're selling wheat or something, it might include our most important customers, right? Because they need to know about this as well. It might have also a record of procedural manuals and critical information, such as our BCP or our IT contingency plan. It might have our specifications for alternate sites and also have our information on our backups and procedures on there. So this is also another large document. However, it is a subset of our business continuity plan. However, they do overlap, and sometimes the terms are used interchangeably. So here we have a quick overview, a quick reference. So here we have our immediate response plan and what people and resources are going to be protected in this case, followed by our responsible individuals. So the chair is going to invoke it, and then the people that are going to be assigned to the disaster recovery team, and then we're going to have like a resource inventory. So in this recovery steps, it says resource recovery. The DRT will assign departmental items to assess the status of corporate hardware and software resources documented in Appendix A and B of the plan. So that's going to list all of our inventory right there. And then we're going to have our plan maintenance just like we had in the BCP, in which we're going to review this quarterly and through structured walkthroughs and maybe even full-on drills. IT contingency plans, these are going to be a component of the BCP, and it's going to specify alternate IT procedures that we can switch over to when we are faced with an attack or a disruption of service leading to a disaster for our organization, right? So we're going to have possible interim measures. These could be operating out of an alternate site. It could be using alternate equipment or systems. It could be relocating main systems. However, the effectiveness of the IT contingency plan is going to depend on our key personnel understanding the components of the IT contingency plan and when and how it should be initiated, and when the organization or how it's going to be initiated when the organization is facing an attack or a disruption in its normal services, right? And so reviewing a checklist from time to time is going to allow us to see that all aspects of the IT contingency plan are actually in place, and it has everything that we need to adequately recover, right? So it should include adequate training to our employees and management in order to actually exercise this contingency plan and maintain it. And we're going to have to re-examine this from time to time to make sure that, you know, we're keeping up with current practices, and we're keeping up. We have all our employees change, because employees are going to rotate out of the business, and we're going to want to make sure our employees and management are also up to date. Um, Before we move on to succession plans, there is something called a backup contingency plan, and this is a documented plan that's going to have specific procedures and processes um, in the event that any changes that we made can be undone, right? So this might be a plan for key individuals or a list of systems with backout timeframes and specific steps to undo the changes, right? And so maybe this is part of our backup plan as well. But moving forward, succession plans. So a succession plan is going to ensure that key personnel have one or more backups who can perform critical functions if needed, right? So same way like in the US government, right? We have a president, we have a vice president, we have what chief of staff, we have secretary of treasury, and all those other individuals, right? And so they have a succession plan in the case of the president being able to perform his duties. The vice president takes over. If the vice president can't do it, then then either the speaker of the house or somebody was going to do that, right? And so here we're going to identify our key individuals as replacements. We're going to identify the people that they're actually going to replace. We're also going to name what functions they're able to perform, and they also need to be trained to take over if they have to. Failover. So failover is going to be a technique that ensures a redundant component, device, or application can be quickly and efficiently take over for any failed assets, right? So for an example, a load balancer provides failover, right? If one or more of our servers are down or it's taking too long to respond, the load balancer is going to redirect the traffic to other healthy servers. So here we have 3 primary servers, and 2 of these servers are down. So we have redundant assets here in order to in the pool that are going to ensure that there is no service interruption. So we have these 2 servers down here that can take over in case there is a problem. It is important that we include these in our BCPs in order to minimize the impact of the scope of the disaster. So take an inventory of our Critical assets should be part of this, and we should likewise take inventory of all of our redundant assets. So, in addition, we need to map out our primary assets to our redundant assets. That way, we can. This is going to help us quickly regain functionality in the event of a disaster, and it's going to streamline the recovery process. That way, we avoid as much downtime as possible. Right? We might even have these things kick in automatically in this case. Alternate business practices. So components of our BCP may also focus directly on adjusting how our business is going to do business, right? So alternate business practices may be necessary if some major element of our business changes, like maybe moving customer services from a main facility to an alternate processing site that's in a different geographic location, right? Um, in this case, the new facility might be understaffed, or they might be less well equipped to provide the same level of customer service that our previous location did. So, in response to these conditions, maybe we relax our quotas. Maybe we have lowered expectations for a particular department, or maybe we even offload this processing to a third party and contract somebody out for this. Um, so, business processes are going to need to adapt, right? The former, it might require a modification to our service level agreements with our customers, right? Um, or the latter might mean that we have to offload all of our services. I mean, in offloading off of all of our services, we might have to have entirely new business arrangements, right? So, in either case, our business processes have to adapt. Testing exercises. So, every business continuity plan, every disaster response plan, it should be tested as part of its implementation. And our development process should include a evaluation phase to test for its effectiveness, right? And so FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, it recommends several types of exercises that we do to evaluate our BCPs and our DRPs. So, number one on here is going to be walkthroughs, workshops, and orientation seminars. So, these are often used to basically provide awareness and training for our disaster recovery team members. They're going to describe the contents of our BCPs, our DRPs, any other plans, and we're going to discuss our roles and our responsibilities in these plans. So, we're going to sit out and talk about all of these, and it's maybe even seminar orientated, right? When it comes to tabletop exercises, um, this is going to be a discussion based session where our disaster recovery team is going to discuss their roles in an emergency situation. And so we're also going to have their responses in this emergency situation. So it is kind of like, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, we are going to take our role and we're going to talk about it as if it's really happening. And from there, maybe we get some insight onto how things would occur if it really did happen. Um, a functional exercise is going to be an action based session where the employees validate their plans, right? And we're going to perform our scenario based activities in a simulated environment, right? So maybe we have some sort of um, virtual environment in which we can act as though a hack is happening or something like that, right? A functional exercise also for you guys that have especially gone to school in the United States. We constantly have fire drills and stuff like that in school. So that will be a representation of a functional exercise in which all of us had to leave out in order to practice fire safety. Um, Next up, we have full scale exercises. So these are going to be action based sessions that reflect real situations. These are usually held on site, they use real personnel, and they're mostly conducted by public agencies. So typically, this might be like a war game, how the U.S. Army and stuff they do full scale exercises in which they'll gather all their troops, etc. Downtown, sometimes they'll evacuate like the Capitol building, um, the House of Representatives, etc., and have um, federal agencies respond as part of their full scale exercise. Um, the fire department might actually set buildings on fire and try to put them out to reflect a real life situation. Um, so things of that nature. All right. So after action reports, you might see these as a AAR. This is going to be analysis of the events that can provide insights to improving our response process in the future. It also can be referred to as a LLR. That's going to be a lessons learned report. So in an AAR, we're going to report on exactly what happened and how the organization responded. Right. Um, we're going to identify whether we followed our BCP in the first place, um, and then also see if our BCP actually helped, right? Did it ensure the continuity of our business operations? And so, as we learn from our successes and failures, this is going to help us with our process and refine our plans so that way we'll be better positioned to protect our organization in the future. Right? So, we're going to ask ourselves what happened? What did the organization do? Did we follow the plan? What elements did we fail to implement? Were these elements relevant? Did the BCP address the situation? Were there any gaps in the BCP? Did we recover? Did our recovery team perform its job well? Are there any additional exercises needed? Um, and if we had a new simulation, how will we respond better? And do we need to change our BCP? Right. So these after action reports allow us to go back and look on how we responded to our either tabletop exercise or a functional exercise and make sure that we actually performed adequately so that we maintain our business processes. So, guidelines for developing a business continuity plan, we must make sure that our business continuity plan is comprehensive. This, as I said before, is a very large document. We're going to want to hit all possible things that may happen and ensure that we um, stay viable in case the worst happens, in case there's a disaster. So we're going to want to also develop a supplemental DRP, disaster recovery plan, for restoring our IT operations. We have to make sure that this DRP is going to have backup procedures for our critical information. We need to draft an IT contingency plan to ensure the continuity of our IT procedures and ensure that our personnel are actually trained on this plan. That way we can maintain in the case of a disaster. Um, Draft a backup contingency plan in order to quickly revert mistakes because, hey, maybe we don't need to go this far. Maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was, or maybe this plan is not going according to plan, right? And we need to revert those mistakes that we made. Um, have a succession plan for replacing key personnel because in the event of a disaster, we are not always going to have our key personnel there. So we are going to need to replace them. We're going to need to have failover, just like we're going to have failover in our technical assets, we're going to have them in our personnel assets. So we're going to also incorporate our failover techniques in our BCP. So we're going to want to inventory our primary and redundant assets and map them out to each other. That way we have proper failover. We're also going to want to incorporate alternative business practices into our business continuity plan because, hey, we still want to be viable as a company. All right. Just because there's a disaster doesn't mean that we have to go completely under. Sometimes we're going to have to adapt in order to stay afloat, right? Um, Nintendo started off by selling uh, cards, right? Playing cards, and now they're a video game company. Sega was losing the console wars, and they now make video games rather than making hardware. We're also going to want to conduct testing exercises, right? We're going to want testing exercises to ensure that our BCP or our DRP is actually working. So we'll want to have several different kinds, right? You may have fire drills. You may have ones where you're testing an active shooter. This is 2020. That does happen. We could have drills on, where we're simulating an active hack or something like that, right? So we're going to need to test things as much as possible. And we're going to want to draft after action reports so that we can learn from these tests and learn from our successes and our mistakes. We want to make sure our test actually worked, if our plan actually worked correctly, right? And if it didn't work correctly, what can we do to identify areas for improvement? Um, and after we've done that, we want to go back and modify the business continuity plan as needed. Um, and also, we're going to want to update our business continuity plan, not only because of learning from our exercises, but also um, maybe updates to our business process, maybe maybe changes on somebody else, right? Maybe there's something happens to another corporation, right? That could happen to us, right? So we're going to want to modify this BCP as time changes. And with that, we have our final exercise. Um, this activity is going to be developing a business continuity plan. We are going to need to incorporate business continuity plan processes in our plans, right? Developtech will use this plan for recovery and restoration. We are going to start with a template that is developed by FEMA, and we are going to review the template and discuss how to apply it to Developtech. And with that, that concludes Chapter 11.